Good morning to all of you on the east side, and good afternoon, those of you who are overseas. I'm delighted to start this new program talking about various issues, various crises around the world. But today I'm going to focus on one subject that has preoccupied me for nearly 5 decades, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. 5 decades ago, I said then, the only practical solution to Israeli-Palestinian conflict has to be based on a two-state solution. And I must tell you, despite of everything that has transpired since, I still hold to the notion that there is no other practical solution. Let me take you back a little bit to where this idea, or that is the notion of the two-state solution, remained valid all these years. In spite of all the ups and downs that Israeli-Palestinians have experienced, the fighting, the incursion, the terrorist activities, the losses, the destruction, all of that has taken place for 5 decades or more, since the Six-Day War, which is 57 years ago. But one thing remained constant. Coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians is a fact of life that cannot be changed under any circumstances. Everyone needs to remember, there are nearly 7 million Palestinians sitting within Israel and around Israel with 7 million Israeli Jews. Regardless of how many more wars will take place, regardless how many Palestinians will be displaced, regardless how many more will be killed, 7 million Palestinians are going to be there, and Israel will simply have to live with that reality, whether it likes it or not. But then comes the question, if coexistence is inevitable under any circumstances, what it is that we need to find? Why do we need to find a formula whereby, at a minimum, both sides can live in peace side by side? And this is really where the whole begins, and we very well where it's going to end. The October 7 attack, the vicious attack that Hamas has taken against Israeli civilians and some soldiers, was the most atrocious, barbaric attack that has ever taken place throughout the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for nearly 8 decades. This attack for the Israelis was reminiscent of something far greater, far more painful, which is the Holocaust. The concept of the never again for the Israelis become alive one more time. So we have to understand the psychological dimension of that attack and how that reverberated throughout the Israeli society. So it is perfectly understandable that Israelis are going to retaliate against Hamas, and because Hamas has done something that's simply unacceptable. But when this attack occurred, I was actually the day after in Jordan, in Amman, Jordan. And I was talking to colleagues and friends of mine, and I said, you know what? What happened now with this horrific attack has brought back to the fore that the only practical solution is a two-state solution. That is, all these years, the Palestinian resistance and the Israeli resistance as well, that is, the Palestinian resisting, actually many of them deny Israel's right to exist, and the Israelis persistent in continuing the occupation, has done nothing but both sides now they can look at themselves and say, what have we in fact gained? The Hamas's attack was a culmination and has to be taken in the context of nearly 6 years, six decades of occupation. Again, no one can justify what they have done, but to take it out of context as if it came from nowhere, it's a mistake. Because if we are going to look for a solution, we have to look at what has transpired over these years of occupation, what the Palestinians have experienced, how much they have suffered, the agony and the pain that they've experienced day in and day out, both in the West Bank and in Gaza as well. But for Israel, it was a matter of national security. The Israeli public has been convinced that the creation of a Palestinian state will pose an existential danger to Israel itself. When in fact, after 8 years of conflict, we now realize that Israel cannot be secure unless there is a Palestinian state, and the Palestinian cannot have a state unless Israel feels safe and secure. So Hamas's attack and Israeli retaliation, where we hoped at the time that this could move the process, could bring the process back of a two-state solution to the fore, began to fade again as the Israeli retaliation moved from the punishing Hamas into a war of revenge and retribution, and then became a war of ethnic cleansing. And we look 2 years and nearly 2.5 years later. Gaza today is in utter and complete ruin. More than 70,000 Palestinians were killed. More than 100,000 were injured. And in each way, in each possible way, that could have supported, could have moved the process forward, a peaceful coexistence between the two sides. The Israelis, as well as the Palestinians, many of them that I talked to over many, many years, they know that ultimately this has to be the path. But the Israeli government, specifically in the last 19 years, since Prime Minister Netanyahu came back to power, he's done everything humanly possible to torpedo such a prospect. But here comes the United States. I have been saying and maintaining all along that if the United States wanted to end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it could have done so. Just remember, every American administration going back to 1948 supported a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict based on a two-state solution. That is what every administration has advocated in support of a two-state solution. But all these years, in fact, the United States has never once put its foot down and say enough is enough, that we're going to have to move sometime, somewhere in order to end this excruciating, painful, decades-long conflict. What happened, what made things so much worse, is that throughout this horrific war in Gaza, with this unbelievable destruction, nearly 90% of all of Gaza lay flat today, the United States, who've been President Biden, and now Trump, who've been singing the song of a two-state solution, have done nothing but continue to support Israel day in and day out, sending killing machines to Gaza, allowing Israel to basically use starvation and deprivation of humans of needed supply, and make the situation in Gaza ever more worse, when in fact that conflict, that horrific conflict, provided an opportunity, awakening call. There was an opportunity to reach a breakthrough, but the United States, the two administrations, Biden as well as Trump, has not taken a significant, concrete step to end this war much earlier, which President Biden could have done. And certainly when President Trump took over, he could have also taken such decisive step and put the kind of pressure necessary on Israel to realize, to wake up, to understand that this cannot continue, and that in the final analysis, Israel will have to continue to live in a state of war for generations to come unless it is prepared to accept this reality, however bitter it may be seen. So here we are. When I looked and surveyed this, what happened during this war, and America continued to supply Israel with these killing machines, in my view, the United States has become complicit to what happened, to the horror that took place in Gaza. I don't know how many of you have been following what happens there closely enough. I must tell you, it is heart-wrenching. I found myself more than once in real tears, thinking to myself, how is it possible? What 20,000 children, Palestinian children, have done to deserve such an early death? Many of them, they don't even know why they were born. And the horrific thing that bothered me more than anything else is that you have Israeli ministers openly and clearly saying that we should eliminate every man, woman, and child throughout Gaza. Openly said as much. When I characterized the war as a genocide, I was attacked by so many different people. But you have a minister in the Israeli government, Lones, saying every child, woman, and man will have to be killed. And when he was asked why, he said, well, the children will grow and become a terrorist. The mother will bring more children who will also grow become a terrorist. And so the only way we can end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is by eliminating the Palestinian altogether. That is how vicious, how horrific some of the Israelis were thinking about this conflict, and how over the many, many years, unfortunately, the Israeli public became so attuned and basically brainwashed to believe, specifically by the Netanyahu successive government, as I said earlier, that a Palestinian state poses an existential danger. So now, as we look at all of these things, we look at what the United States has done over the years. It could have made a huge difference, but it did not. And now came in, of course, the Trump peace plan, and I looked at it very carefully. And there's so many things that have been stated there to disarm Hamas, to bring a new Palestinian Authority, to bring a new, peacekeeping forces and all that. None of that has happened. And since the ceasefire have taken place, Israel has destroyed nearly 3,000 new buildings in Gaza, and again renewed cutting the supplies of basic needs on a number of occasions. What the reaction of the United States been? How did Trump react to that? So what we are saying today is that if we want to end this conflict, the United States ought to take concrete action and say to the Israelis and to the Palestinians, basically challenging them. There is no alternative to two-state solution. You've got to recognize each other's right to exist in peace, and if you do not accept that, the United States ought to basically say, well, then you're going to have to leave you to your own devices. But Israel has and continues to count on unequivocal American support, and for good reason. because many here in the United States, because Israeli conflict for the United States is pretty much like a domestic problem. And there is a massive constituency here in the United States that support Israel no matter what Israel does. But now, after all the everything that we've seen and done, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has reached a new nadir. Israel's reputation today globally is basically been destroyed because many countries feel that Israel basically committed almost a basically immoral bankruptcy because of what happened. I don't know how many decades will take for Israel to recover of what has taken place in Gaza. And now we are confronting once again, where do we go from here? And I challenge everyone, anyone, to come with a solution that will allow Israelis and Palestinians to live in peace and prosper, short of a two-state solution. No one has come up with any such a solution, not once. What we hear today is that the two-state is basically a dead issue, no longer can be revived, but they are not saying, okay, so what's going to happen if there is no prospect of a two-state solution? So let me conclude this by saying, reality will not change. Coexistence will not change. Whatever happened in Gaza, what is taking place in the West Bank is considerably worse at this particular juncture. Israel continued to expand its settlement. The settlers continue to harass Palestinians. Creeping annexation is taking place, and yet the United States saying nothing. This is our reality. So somebody will have to wake up. The United States in particular ought to say enough is enough. We're going to have to put a kind of pressure necessary in order to bring about an end to this horrific conflict that has exacted so much pain and agony, suffering and destruction and death for nearly 80 years. The time has come. So I'm still a believer. What I believed 50 years ago, I still believe today. Because in the final analysis, Israel will never feel safe and secure unless there is an independent Palestinian state committed to peace, and the Palestinians will never have a state of their own unless Israel feels safe and secure. And that is the premise on which the United States administration ought to work on. You have to make a choice. They have to make a choice. Do we want to live in peace, or do we want to continue to kill each other for another 2, 3 generations? It will be a tragic, very tragic, if Israel will continue to raise another generation and another generation of soldiers learning, training to kill, looking at the Palestinian as a perpetual enemy. And it will be also tragic for the Palestinian, for the young to grow with no hope, hopelessness. And the young and old ask themselves, where do we go from here? Remember this, 90% of all Palestinians were born under occupation. And 80% of Israelis were born when occupation began, since it began. This is not a status quo that can be sustained. The time has come, and I call on the United States administration, the Trump administration, not to look at this 20-point plans and try to implement it when in fact there is hardly any reference to eventually creating Palestinian states. It's just mentioned toward the end of this document. It should be front and center. That's where the process will begin. They should sit down and negotiate on one condition, that they both accept the eventual outcome of a two-state solution, and then all the other details can be discussed to reach toward that end. In the next lecture, I will be dwelling on what is going to take. That is, what are the obstacles that can be resolved, need to be resolved, in fact, must be resolved, in order to be able to realize a dream for so many Palestinians and so many Israelis as well, a dream of to live in peace with the Palestinians, grow and prosper together. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much for attending. We're going to open it up to questions and answers. So if you have a question for Alon on this lecture or anything else, anything related to general topics, his previous articles, please feel free. If you use the raise hand feature here in Zoom, I'll open your microphone and you can ask the question. So in the meantime, we have a pre-submitted question, which you talk a lot about coexistence in your work, and how can you coexist when there are people on each side saying that they want to kill the other side, exterminate them, drive them out of the area?
You know, there are always been, and there will always be some extremists on both sides who do not still want to accept each other's right to a state of their own. There will be. But I can tell you today, they are not the majority by any stretch of imagination. But it's going to take a great deal of convincing. It's going to take a power like the United States to come in and say, look at your reality and try to gauge where you're going to be 10, 15, 20 years down the line if there is no agreement today. Will the Palestinians ever give up their right to statehood? The answer, in my view, is categorically no. With the Israelis, another 2, 3 generations will continue to fight and kill Palestinians? I don't think so. There are opportunities now. In fact, what is happening today provides an opportunity to bring an end to this horrific conflict. Not regardless of how many extremists on both sides opposed to it, but they are a minority, not a majority.
We have another pre-submitted question, which again, anyone listening, if in the future you cannot attend a lecture, please feel free to submit any questions in advance to info@alonbenmeir.com. We will read those live on the Zoom, and we will have the entire recording posted the next day, so you can go ahead and listen there and hear your question and Alon's answer. So this one, in many articles, and I'll add that again today you've stated Israel was committing ethnic cleansing, committing genocide in Gaza. What evidence is there to support it? And I'll add to this, you mentioned some of the government ministers that expressed some genocidal intent, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have followed through on that. So what evidence is there to support this?
When you look in the meaning of genocide by definition, just about everything in that definition fit what Israel has done in Gaza. The often indiscriminate killing, certainly the ethnic cleansing that has taken place, the nearly complete destruction of the whole area, the displacement several times, 7, 8 times of Palestinians, the desire to push them out, not to speak of the people, the number of people that have been killed. Was there, in fact, a need to kill 70,000 plus Palestinians in order for Israel to achieve its objective? What Netanyahu said and wanted all along is to liquidate Hamas completely. And I've been saying all along, this is not going to happen. So in this connection, and I'm glad you asked the question, what happened in Gaza provide an opportunity. But we also need to understand that you cannot reach any kind of an agreement, of any kind of solution, unless both realize There is no other way, no other path to pursue. And the Arab state today, specifically the Saudis and others, have been telling to the United States, we cannot normalize, for example, relation with the state of Israel unless there's a clear path that could lead to a Palestinian state. So what happened, the genocide, and that's the tragedy that happened in Gaza, should probably a lesson to everyone concerned that this should not ever happen again. And there is a solution, and that peaceful solution ought to be pursued.
I have another question related to this lecture. You said towards the end that Israelis need to feel safe and secure for there to be peace with the Palestinians. How can the Palestinians themselves make the Israelis feel safe and secure?
Well, I think this is what I said earlier. That is, the Palestinian realize their national aspiration for statehood. I believe and I maintain they would want to maintain that. They want to keep that state because they know one thing. If they were to challenge Israel again, if they were going to commit en masse violence against Israel, Israel will go in and basically will destroy any prospect of having for the Palestinian to have a Palestinian state. So the Palestinian would have a vested interest to make sure that Israel's security is guarded. But what I'm saying, under any kind of peace agreement, the security issue will have to be addressed very carefully. Both sides will have to collaborate extensively on all security matters so that both sides feel secure. And in this regard, Jordan will have to be playing as well a role with something we can address in the future.
Okay, we have a separate question, not on this topic, related to one of your previous articles a couple of weeks ago. Just a general, what is your perspective on the ongoing protests in Iran, and what sort of change do you expect the citizens to be able to make, and what sort of impact can or will the international community have in that regard?
Well, the protest in Iran, obviously, it's not new. They have done that before, albeit on a much smaller scale. But I think this time around, I don't believe that the Iranian people, especially the young, are going to rest unless they will be able to achieve something. They need more freedom. They need the ability to pursue what they want, what they like. And having lived for how many, since 1979 under this terrible regime, it is no longer acceptable to them, specifically also when the economy is continuing to deteriorate. So the mullahs in Iran do have a choice. They either begin to loosen all these restrictions on men, women, and allow them to have a much higher level of freedom, or they have to relinquish their position. But obviously, I don't think they will do so voluntarily. And this is why in one of my recent articles, I suggested there's only one institution, that is the military and the National Guard. They're the only one who, in fact, can push this government out, take charge for 6 months or so, and call for a general election and establish a new government. And at that point, the military will relinquish its responsibility and its position. Some people say this is not going to happen. And again, I say, show me other possibilities. I'm not suggesting that the Iranian government, currently they're going to easily move on or take one of these options. It may take another year, it may take another two. But ultimately, this regime, in its current formation, will no longer be able to exist. And something is going to change. So that major change, that counter-revolutionary movement, is going to have to come from somewhere. I believe the military would be the right institution that can, in fact, change the dynamics in Iran itself.
We have one more pre-submitted question, unless any of the participants here today would like to raise their hand, ask a question. We will wrap up with this last question. Um, you've gotten a lot of critiques about your article, Trump's Gestapo is terrorizing America, particularly complaints about the use of the phrase Gestapo in reference to ICE. What would you say to those criticisms, and how would you say that the term Gestapo is or is not accurate in relation to what's happening in the U.S.?
Well, for many, of course, the comparison was something that they could not really take. But I just wanted to realize this during the Germany, when Gestapo was operating, was oppressing against any kind of opposition, be that German or otherwise. That was Germany at the time, under dictatorship. And the Gestapo was operating on behest of this horrific government led by then Hitler. But now we're talking about the United States. Just imagine the horror, what has taken place in Minneapolis. American citizens being pulled out of the cars, children being incarcerated, 2 people being killed. The community in Minneapolis being terrorized. But you have to think in terms of all of this happening in the context of this country. This country is based on the freedom, on the right of the people to demonstrate, and that's happening right here in the United States. I could not find any other concept to what you can compare this to. Who would ever think that in this country we can witness the horror that has taken place in Minneapolis? And that's why I made that comparison. So the time has come for people to understand that what Trump has done, dispatching ICE to these communities, specifically democratic cities, it's just not acceptable. And it can never be acceptable. And its time has come to call it as I see it. And as I see it, it was nothing less than an activities akin to what the Gestapo have been doing in Germany.
Okay, we do have one more question, so we will continue to answer. So Mark asks, what keeps presidents and legislators from acting on this issue, putting a thumb on Israel to accept a just settlement? Will this ever change? It seems impossible for the legislature to say stop. It seems they're powerless.
Can you repeat that question?
Yes. What keeps presidents and legislators from acting on this issue, putting a thumb on Israel to accept a just settlement to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? And will this ever change?
Well, you see, everyone heard. It's an extremely complex, deep. There is tremendous amount of collaboration on just about every single field of life, from intelligence to technology, to economics, to name it, to the arts, everything you can imagine. But the United States in particular, why I think the United States is the only country that can exert that kind of influence, because the United States have been providing Israel year after year nearly $4 billion worth of military equipment, and certainly billions in economic support. No country in the world that has received this much American aid, no country than the state of Israel. So the United States can exert direct pressure on Israel to accept the principle that they've got to coexist peacefully with the Palestinians. The United States ought to put its foot down. And I'm not suggesting the United States ought to dictate every single term of any kind of future agreement, but they can get Israel to commit itself to two-state solution.
Okay, I believe that was our last question. So we would like to thank you all for joining. I'll turn it over back to Alon for closing thought.
Well, all I can say, having been witness to this conflict for so many years, honestly, I feel the pain day in and day out. And I just think, what amazing difference would have been had these two people, instead of killing each other for so many years, been working together, prosper together. Both people are, there's brilliant people on both sides. They could have changed the entire Middle East. They could have brought a renaissance to the entire region. That's how much has been lost. And there's so much can be gained if they only realize that both have rights, both have unquestionable right to exist, and they need to recognize each other right. Again, thank you so much for joining me on this session, and I hope we see you again next week. And I'll be elaborating on what is going to take, in fact, to move this Israeli-Palestinian process into some kind of a conclusion. What are the concessions that to be made by both sides to achieve that objective? Thank you.